Hey plant lovers, welcome back. Today we're talking about why a peace lily blooms, and what I discovered is going to change everything you think you know about this plant. Because the bloom you've been waiting years to see isn't random, and it isn't luck, it's a message. And once you understand who's sending it, you'll never look at that plant in the corner the same way again. Picture this. It's early morning, maybe 7 o'clock. The light's still gray and soft through the curtains. You walk past the corner of your living room where you've kept that peace lily for years. You barely glance at it anymore. It's just there, glossy and green, like furniture that happens to be alive. You've watered it without thinking, moved it twice, maybe forgotten it for a week one busy spring. It has never asked for much, and it has never given you much beyond its steady, reliable green. But today, something stops you. A stalk you've never seen before is rising from the center of the leaves. Tall, thin, pale, almost rising on its own accord. And at the top, a single white spathe is unfurling, curved, smooth, the color of cream, wrapping around a slim spike like a held breath. There's the faintest green-sweet smell in the air, the kind you notice only when the room is still and the house hasn't woken up yet. And you think, wait, when did this happen? You stand there a moment longer than you mean to, coffee going cold in your hand, because some part of you knows this wasn't there yesterday, and some part of you suspects it didn't happen by accident. Here's what most people don't realize. You can own a peace lily for 8, 10, 12 years and never see it bloom on its own. Not once. It'll sit there, healthy and lush, throwing out leaf after leaf and nothing more. And then there's someone down the street who's had theirs for barely 3 years, and one ordinary Tuesday, it sends up a flower, and then another. So the question isn't just why it bloomed, it's what does it mean that it bloomed? Now. Here. With you. In this room, this year, after all this time. And here's what's wild. The spiritual explanation and the scientific one arrive at the exact same conclusion. From completely different paths, generations apart, never having spoken to each other, they land on the same truth. But before we dive in, hit that like and subscribe, because what's coming is going to reshape how you see every plant in your home. Let's start with the plant itself, because the reputation matters here. The peace lily is the houseplant people reach for when they're convinced they kill everything. It's the office plant, the waiting room plant, the gift plant that survives the forgotten desk and the dark hallway. It tolerates low light. It bounces back from a droop so dramatic you'd swear it was dead, then perks up an hour after watering like nothing happened. It asks for almost nothing. That's its whole reputation, the plant that simply will not quit. Hospitals keep them. Banks keep them. They sit in the lobbies of buildings where no one has thought about a plant in years. And they endure. The peace lily is, in the popular imagination, the very definition of an undemanding, indestructible, set-it-and-forget-it plant. And yet this one event, the unforced, natural bloom in an indoor home, almost never happens for most owners. The leaves come easily. The flower does not. You can do everything that keeps the plant alive and never once see it flower on its own. The same toughness that makes it survive anything is exactly what makes the bloom so rare. A plant built to endure neglect is a plant that learns to hold its energy back, to wait, to never spend more than it has to. The flower is the one thing it refuses to give cheaply. So why? Why will this plant give you years of effortless green and then withhold the one thing you actually want from it? Why does it bloom for one household and not another, with no obvious difference between them? There are 2 people watching this right now. One has kept a peace lily on the same shelf for 20 years and has never seen a single white spathe rise on its own. The other moved one into a new room 18 months ago and now can't stop it from flowering. Same plant, same species, wildly different stories. And I'll tell you something that's going to surprise you. Both the spiritual explanation and the scientific one point to the exact same conclusion, just from completely different paths. But to understand it, we need to start with what wisdom traditions have been saying for generations. Let's begin in the American South. Across Louisiana, Mississippi, and the low country of South Carolina, there's a long folk tradition of reading houseplants as quiet indicators of a home's condition. Not its decor, its condition. In African American families across the Gulf Coast, plant-keeping knowledge was passed down through generations the way recipes were. Mother to daughter, aunt to niece, often without anything written down. And within that oral tradition, the flowering of a normally leaf-only plant carried weight. It wasn't treated as decoration. It was treated as a sign that the house had settled, that the constant churn of moving, struggle, and upheaval had finally quieted enough for something to bloom. What these communities held was not that the flower caused good fortune, but that the flower confirmed it. The bloom was the evidence, not the cause. A home stable enough, peaceful enough, and tended enough to coax a flower out of a stubborn plant was understood to be a home where the people had found their footing. When it happened, it was noticed. It was pointed out to children. It was remembered as a marker of a particular season in the family's life. The year things finally felt steady. And here's a detail that I find quietly powerful. In these households, plants weren't kept in the bright front room for display. They were kept where the family actually lived. Near the kitchen, by the back door, in the room where people gathered and lingered. The logic was simple, and it turns out to be biologically sound. A plant kept where life happens is a plant that gets noticed, watered on rhythm, talked past every day, and folded into the household's routine. The flowering plant, in this tradition, was the plant that had been pulled into the family's life, rather than parked at its edges. It bloomed because it belonged. That's not superstition. That's an observation about attention, repeated so many times across so many homes that it hardened into a saying. Now travel across the ocean to the tropical forests of northern South America, Colombia, and Venezuela, where the peace lily actually comes from. This isn't folklore here. It's the plant's literal home. In the understory of these rainforests, the peace lily grows on the shaded forest floor beneath a dense canopy, in warm, humid, still air, where direct sun almost never reaches. The plant was first carried into European attention in the 1800s by Gustav Wallis, a German collector who encountered it growing exactly there, which is why the most common houseplant version still carries his name, Spathiphyllum wallisii. So every peace lily on every desk and windowsill in America is a descendant of a forest floor plant from the Colombian understory. It never stopped being one. And in the cultural traditions of communities living alongside these forests, flowering plants of the understory were read as signs of a balanced, undisturbed environment. A forest floor that produced flowers was a forest floor in equilibrium. Enough light filtering down through the canopy, enough moisture rising from the soil, enough quiet that nothing was being torn up or trampled or flooded. Disturbance meant leaves and survival. The plant hunkering down, regrowing, holding on. Stability meant flowers. The bloom marked harmony, not chaos. A flowering understory was a forest at rest. That observation, made by people who lived inside the plant's native habitat, watching it for centuries, turns out to describe the exact biological reality botanists would confirm much later. The forest dwellers had no laboratory. They simply paid attention to which conditions preceded a flower, year after year, until the pattern was unmistakable. Hold on to that. It matters more than it seems right now. Now north, to the desert southwest, to the Hopi people of northeastern Arizona. The Hopi are master observers of plants, dryland farmers who, without irrigation, without microscopes, without any lab, learned to read what a plant's behavior was telling them about its conditions. In a place where water is scarce, and every season is a negotiation with the weather, paying close attention to plants wasn't a hobby. It was survival knowledge, refined over countless generations. The Hopi tradition holds a principle that runs through all their agriculture. A plant doesn't decide to make something beautiful and effortless until its own survival is no longer in question. As the elders put it, the plant gives its gift only when it has enough to give. Sit with that for a second. It's a statement about priorities, and it's exactly right. A plant fighting for water, fighting for light, fighting just to hold its leaves up does not flower. It can't afford to. Flowering is what a plant does when the fight is over and there's something left in reserve. What's fascinating is that this observation, made without microscopes or lab equipment, passed down across generations of careful watching, aligns exactly with what plant physiologists confirmed decades later about how flowering actually works. The plant doesn't bloom because it's struggling. It blooms when it has crossed past struggling into stability, with energy left over. The Hopi named the principle long before anyone could measure it. And finally, Feng Shui. Because the peace lily holds a real and specific place in Feng Shui, the peace lily is valued as a balancing plant. Its rounded, downward-arching leaves and its tolerance for shaded corners make it a classic choice for softening sharp, restless energy and bringing calm to a space, which is exactly why practitioners place it where a home needs to settle. The downward curve of the leaves matters in this reading. Where many plants reach upward and outward, the peace lily's foliage drapes gently, and that gentle, settling motion is understood to calm and ground the energy of a room, rather than stir it up. The white spathe is read as a symbol of purity and peace, the resolution of conflict into stillness. So when this plant blooms, it isn't read simply as good energy. It's read specifically as confirmation that a space has reached balance, that the calm the plant was placed to encourage has actually taken hold. Placement matters in this reading. A bloom near the entrance is taken to mean balance is entering the home. In the bedroom, it points to peace in relationships and rest. In the living room, harmony among the people who gather there. In a home office, clarity and steady focus. Always the same underlying message, expressed through where it appears. What's interesting is that Feng Shui doesn't contradict science here. It complements it in a way that I find absolutely extraordinary. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. But quickly, if this is already shifting how you see your peace lily, hit that like button right now. That one tap tells the platform this kind of careful, deep content matters. And it's what lets me keep going this far on a single plant. Now comes the scientific part. And I promise, when you hear it, everything is going to make sense. A peace lily is, at its core, an energy accountant. Every single day, it runs a budget. Through photosynthesis, it earns a certain amount of energy from the light it receives. And every day, it spends that energy on the things it has to do to stay alive. Maintaining its leaves, running its roots, fighting off stress, keeping itself going. Flowering is expensive. A flower is a luxury purchase. And like any careful accountant, the plant will not make a luxury purchase until the essential bills are paid and there's a genuine surplus left over. Think of it like an athlete. A body under constant strain, just barely getting through each day, won't build anything extra. It spends everything it has just to recover. But a body that's well-fed, well-rested, and consistently trained past the point of mere survival starts to develop capacity it didn't have before. The plant works the same way. Bloom is what surplus looks like. Here's where the real mechanism lives, and researchers at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences have mapped it out in detail. Their work on Spathiphyllum flowering physiology found that natural blooming is governed by three interacting factors working together: the plant's maturity and genetics, temperature, and, this is the one almost nobody knows about, photoperiod, meaning the length of uninterrupted darkness the plant experiences each night. That last one is the secret hiding in plain sight. The UF/IFAS research found that peace lilies that bloom naturally in spring initiate those flowers months earlier, back in the short day, long night stretch of December and January. The decision to bloom is made in darkness, weeks or months before anything appears above the soil. The plant is reading the night. It's measuring how long, how consistent, and how uninterrupted that darkness is. Because a stable, rhythmic night signal tells it the environment is predictable. And a plant will only commit to the long, expensive project of flowering when it trusts that conditions are going to hold. Think about what's actually happening here. The plant has no eyes, no calendar, no clock. What it has is a chemical timer running through its tissues, sensitive to the length of unbroken darkness. Every night that darkness arrives clean and on schedule, that timer advances. The plant is, in effect, counting nights, building a case, night after night, that the world around it is stable enough to bet on. This is the same mechanism that tells a poinsettia when to turn red and a chrysanthemum when to flower. It's one of the oldest and most reliable signals in the plant kingdom. Not temperature, not even light during the day, but the honest, unfakeable length of the night. Do you see what this means? A plant sitting next to a lamp that stays on until midnight, or a window with a streetlight blasting in all night, never gets a clean night signal. Every interrupted night resets the count. From the plant's point of view, the world keeps flickering. Light, dark, light again. And a flickering world is an unstable world. So it reads the environment as unreliable, and it stays in maintenance mode. Leaves only. No commitment. It's not being stubborn, it's being prudent. The bloom requires a settled, rhythmic, undisturbed environment. Exactly what the traditions were pointing at all along, in completely different words. And there's one more piece, the energy redirect moment. When a peace lily is young, or stretching for light, or recovering from stress, all its energy goes into leaves and roots, into survival and growth. But when conditions stabilize, steady light, consistent warmth, a clean dark cycle, and a plant mature enough to have banked a surplus, that energy has somewhere new to go. It redirects. The plant stops spending everything on staying alive and finally invests in reproduction. That redirect is the flower. The bloom is the visible moment the plant's books moved from survival into surplus. And here's a detail almost nobody knows, one that makes the whole thing more remarkable. That beautiful white flower isn't actually a flower at all. The peace lily belongs to the arum family, the same family as the monstera and the anthurium, and what you're looking at is a structure built in two parts. The white petal-like hood is called a spathe, and it's really a modified leaf. The true flowers are tiny, packed onto that slim spike in the center, which is called the spadix. So when the plant blooms, it's making a real investment on two fronts at once. The spadix, carrying the actual reproductive flowers, and the spathe, an entire specialized leaf, built purely to advertise them, to catch the eye of a pollinator. The plant spends energy not just on reproducing, but on being seen. That is not the behavior of a plant in survival mode. That is a plant with a surplus deciding to put on a show. And the proof is in what happens at the end. As the bloom ages, the plant pulls the energy back out. The white spathe slowly turns green, and that showy hood quietly demotes itself back into an ordinary working leaf. Nothing is wasted. The surplus is loaned to the flower and then reclaimed. The second confirmation comes from extension horticulturists at universities like Clemson and South Dakota State, whose plant guidance lands on the same point from the practical side. Peace lilies typically fail to flower when they're too young, under about a year old, and when their light and environment haven't given them enough banked energy to justify the cost. Small, cheap nursery plants are often sold long before they're biologically ready, which is why so many people feel like they're failing when the plant simply isn't old enough yet. The institutions, the folk keepers, and the forest dwellers all circle the same fact. The flower waits for readiness. Do you see what this means? Across every tradition, the same observation kept surfacing. The flower comes only after the struggle ends. The folk keepers of the Gulf Coast read it as a home that had settled. The forest communities read it as an environment in balance. The Hopi read it as a plant with enough to give. And the laboratory, centuries later, confirmed the mechanism precisely. Surplus energy plus a stable, rhythmic environment equals a bloom. Let me lay them side by side, because this is the part that gives me chills. Ancient folk tradition says the flower marks a home that has finally found peace. Feng Shui says the bloom confirms a space that has reached balance. Science says the flower is what happens when a plant's environment becomes stable and predictable enough that surplus energy can finally be spent on something beyond survival. They are all describing the same thing, just in different languages. The common thread running through every one of them is stability. Not luck, not magic, not wealth arriving at the door. A calm, consistent, cared-for environment, held steady long enough that something living inside it can stop merely surviving and start to flourish. The traditions called it peace. The science calls it surplus. They are the same condition seen through two different windows. One window faces inward, toward meaning and home and the feeling of a settled life. The other faces inward too, but toward chemistry, toward photoperiod timers and energy budgets and the honest arithmetic of what a plant can afford. And both windows look out onto the exact same scene. A plant that flowers only when the world around it has finally gone quiet enough to trust. That's the part I can't get over. These were not people comparing notes. The folk keepers of the Gulf Coast never met the forest communities of Colombia. The Hopi farmers of Arizona never read a University of Florida research paper. The Feng Shui practitioners of centuries past had no laboratory. And yet, every single one of them, watching the same stubborn plant from a different corner of the world, arrived at the same conclusion. The flower means the struggle is over. That kind of agreement, reached independently so many times, stops being coincidence. It starts being evidence. Two different paths, one identical truth. Now I know you've been waiting for this part, because understanding why it blooms is one thing, making it happen is another. Here are the factors that actually matter. The first factor is the dark cycle, and it's the one almost nobody talks about. Your peace lily reads the night to decide whether to bloom, so give it a real one. Move it away from lamps that stay on late, away from a TV's glow, away from a window where a streetlight pours in all night. A pitch-dark room from evening onward gives the plant the clean, uninterrupted night signal it needs to commit to flowering. What most people miss is that this is happening months before any flower appears. So consistency over a whole season is what counts, not a single good night. The second factor is light during the day. And yes, this works together with the darkness, not against it. A peace lily can survive in deep shade looking perfectly lush, but a comfortable plant in low light has no surplus to spend on flowers. This is the trap that catches so many people. The plant looks completely healthy, green and full and thriving, so nothing seems wrong, and yet it never blooms. That's because survival and flowering are two different budgets. In low light, the plant has just enough to look good and not a penny more. It needs bright, indirect light to bank the extra energy a flower costs. In most American homes, that means a few feet back from an east-facing window, or filtered light through a sheer curtain on a south-facing one. What you want to avoid is harsh, direct afternoon sun, which scorches the leaves and pushes the plant past stability into stress. Here's a free old-school test. Stand where your plant stands and look toward the window. If you can see a good patch of open sky without buildings or curtains blocking it, you're probably in a decent spot. Bright but gentle is the target. The third factor is consistent watering. Steady, not erratic. The peace lily comes from a humid forest floor where moisture is constant, and wild swings between bone dry and soaking confirm to the plant that conditions are unstable. Remember, instability is the one thing that keeps it from committing to a flower. Let the top inch of soil dry, then water thoroughly until it runs from the drainage holes. The plant will even tell you when you've cut it too close. The dramatic droop is its early warning, and while it bounces back, repeatedly pushing it to that edge is exactly the kind of stress that keeps it in survival mode. Filtered or distilled water helps too. The fluoride and chlorine in much U.S. tap water can brown the leaf tips and add a low-grade stress the plant reads as instability. Steady is the whole point. The plant wants a rhythm it can trust. The fourth factor is maturity and feeding the right way. A peace lily generally won't flower until it's at least a year old and well-established. So a tiny nursery plant simply may not be ready yet. That's not your failure, it's biology. This is worth saying plainly because so many people quietly blame themselves. You bought a small plant, you've cared for it perfectly, and it won't bloom, and you assume you're doing something wrong. Often you're not. It's just young. The plant you see flowering in the store was very likely treated by the grower with a hormone that forces blooms regardless of age, a commercial trick that fades, leaving the plant to return to its own honest timeline. And here's a detail that changes everything. Most general houseplant fertilizers from Home Depot or Lowe's are heavy in nitrogen, which screams, "Make more leaves." Nitrogen is the leaf growth signal. If all the plant hears, month after month, is leaves, 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 it has no reason and no leftover energy to flower. Easing off the nitrogen or switching to a balanced or bloom-oriented feed used sparingly during the growing season removes the very signal that's been blocking flowers in the first place. You're not forcing it to bloom. You're just clearing the message that was telling it not to. And the final factor, the one nobody wants to hear, is patience. Because the decision to bloom is made in darkness, months before you ever see it, there is no button to press and no overnight fix. There's no product on a shelf that delivers a flower on demand, no matter what the label promises. The best things, in plants as in life, can't be forced into existence on a schedule. They can only be set up for and then waited on. Give it a stable season, steady light, real darkness, consistent water, the right age, the right feeding, and you may be looking at 4 to 6 weeks, or considerably longer, before anything stirs. You'll likely spot it before it opens. A slight bulge low in the leaf as the stalk begins to push up from inside. But I promise you, when you see that pale stalk finally rise from the center, everything will have been worth it. Here's the thing about the bloom, though. It doesn't last. A peace lily flower opens white and clean, holds for a couple of weeks, and then slowly turns green as the plant pulls its energy back out and reassigns that spathe to ordinary work. It's temporary. It was always going to be temporary. But the fact that it happens at all, that this plant which survives neglect, which tolerates the dark hallway and the forgotten watering, decides one day to take its hard-won surplus and spend it on something beautiful and useless and brief. That says something. It didn't have to. Nothing forced it. A plant that has spent its whole life being careful, holding back, never spending more than survival required, chose this one moment to be extravagant. That choice only becomes possible when the fear of not making it has finally passed. And here's what strikes me. You created that environment. You gave it the steady light. You let the room go dark at night. You watered it on rhythm, let it mature, stopped flooding it with the wrong food. Whether you understood the biology or not, whether you did it on purpose or simply by living a calm and consistent enough life around it, you built the stability that made the flower possible. The plant did the blooming, but you made the peace it bloomed into. The traditions had this exactly right all along. They just read the flower instead of the photoperiod. Maybe that's the quiet lesson in all of this. The beautiful things rarely show up while we're still fighting to survive. They show up after, once the ground beneath us finally holds still. Bloom is what surplus looks like. Has your peace lily ever bloomed? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Take care of your plant.